Do you wish that your congregation, the members of your church, the people that come Sunday after Sunday, do you wish that they had a better understanding of the scriptures? Do you get this sense that there are gaps, that there are things that maybe most people you assume know, but they don't? Well, what we're going to talk about today is how you can create a stronger biblical foundation throughout your entire congregation by what you do on a Sunday morning and throughout the week. And so we're going to examine what it's going to take to help your congregation become not biblical scholars necessarily, but well-versed in the scriptures so that they can understand how to live a life that is pleasing to God, a life that is honoring to Him, and they can discover the wonders and the mysteries and the amazing stories that we find in scripture to help us grow closer to Jesus. So let's get started. So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing well, whatever it is you're doing and wherever you are, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or whether you're watching on YouTube. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And what we do here, our focus here at Ministry Hackers, is to help pastors and ministry leaders just like you live a dream life in ministry. Now, that doesn't mean this lavish lifestyle, this crazy life that's, full of, Lamborghinis and mansions and all that. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is living a lifestyle where you pastor a growing ministry, a growing church, whatever it is, however big that means to you and what God's called you to do. But at the same time, you have time for your family, time for your friends, time for hobbies and travel, time to do the things that you love to do, time to take care of yourself, whether it's taking care of your body, taking care of your mind, taking care of your emotions, whatever it is that you need to do to be healthy and strong and healthy in your relationship with Jesus and healthy in your relationship with your family, as well as pastor and do ministry and do all the things that God's called you to do. And so I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're a part of this podcast. I'm so glad you're a part of this community. And I hope that today's episode is helpful for you. All of us, as pastors and ministry leaders, we know the value of Scripture, how important the Bible is, not only to our own lives, but to the lives of the people that we lead Sunday after Sunday. Every Sunday, we have people who walk into our congregations. They walk through the doors of our sanctuary, and we preach to them. We open up the Word, and we divide it out, and we share with them what we believe they need to hear from Scripture, what we believe God has placed on our heart, and where God is taking them as individuals, as well as you as a congregation, as a church. But what happens when the people in your congregation, they're not familiar with the Bible? And you reference a story, or you reference something you know from Scripture that you assume most people know. You reference, Daniel in the lion's den, or you reference Jesus feeding the 5,000, or you reference, Moses going through the Red Sea. Like, you reference these things thinking, oh, everybody in the congregation is familiar with that. They know it. They know what I'm talking about. I don't have to go through that with them because they have a foundation, a biblical foundation that I'm building off of. And then you realize that that's not true. That's not the case. People are confused by what you're saying. People aren't clear on what your point is because they don't have the biblical foundation that you're assuming they have. Now, this is an attack on you because I don't think that this is necessarily a you problem. I think this is a church problem. This is something that we have found over the last couple of years. We have found this growing awareness that most people in our congregations do not know the Bible the way we assume they do. And I'm going to talk today about how, number one, this has happened, I believe, and number two, how you can start moving forward and creating a stronger biblical foundation for your congregation so that when you reference something in Scripture that you assume that everybody knows and everybody's familiar with, you can know that they actually do know that they actually are familiar with what you're talking about. And so let's first talk about how we got here. Now, most of us, we grew up in an era where we valued scripture. Like, we valued reading our Bible. We read Bible every day, and we went to church and we got the Bible, and we had Sunday school and we read. But let me just share with you some numbers about where we are as a society of Christians, not just the society as a whole, not just Americans, but we're talking about American Christians. So according to the Pew Research Center, 70.6% of Americans consider themselves Christian. Now, you and I both know that that's probably not entirely accurate. Christian is probably a very loose label that a lot of people put on themselves. Maybe they went to church once, or maybe they grew up going to church, and so they're saying, yep, I'm a Christian. So that number is, we all know that number is probably not entirely accurate. However, let's look at the next number, which I think is the one that's more concerning. Lifeway. Research that Lifeway has done shows that 68% of Christians, 68%, have never read through the whole Bible. Now, I know there are parts of Scripture that are just challenging. If you're in the Old Testament and you're trying to, work your way through Leviticus or Numbers, like, I get that that's challenging. But I think that this is probably not, they've read all the Bible except for those couple books. Most likely what this is showing is that 68% of American Christians have never read through the entire Bible, which means that they have probably never read a good portion of it. Maybe parts they don't understand, maybe prophecies that they don't really get. Maybe they haven't read through all the Psalms. Maybe they haven't read some of the later letters that are in the New Testament. Maybe they haven't read through Revelation. But do you see how that can quickly become, they haven't read through most of the Bible? They've read through the Gospels. They've read through Acts. Maybe they read through a few of Paul's letters. Maybe they read some of the historical books, maybe, 1st and 2nd Samuel or 1st and 2nd Kings. Maybe they read through Genesis. But there is a lot, not a lot of stories and a lot of history and understanding that we find in those parts of Scripture, but there's a lot of theology and a lot of understanding about relationship with Jesus, a lot of our perspective on who God is. There's a lot that Christians are missing by not reading the portions they don't understand, or that they don't get, or that don't make sense to them. And so the question is where's the disconnect? Now, I think there are a lot of factors going into this. So please understand, I'm recognizing there are a lot of factors going into why people are not reading their Bibles, engaging with it, and why they don't know their scriptures. But I think, in my personal opinion, over the 20 plus years of ministry that I've been in, watching the church grow and develop over the course of my lifetime, I believe one of the biggest contributing factors to people not knowing scripture is the removal of Sunday school. Now, before anybody gives me some harsh comments or sends me letters or emails or whatever, please understand, I think that removing Sunday school in the 10-year window that took place was probably the right choice. If you're doing Sunday school today and your attendance is low, it's because Sunday school as a model, as a ministry model, has ran its course and is no longer an effective way of doing ministry. But the problem is, and this is where I think the breakdown happened from my perspective, is that when we removed Sunday school, we did not replace it with a strong biblical teaching, discipleship, ministry model. Most of us, most churches, most pastors, what we use to replace Sunday school is we replaced it with small groups. Now, all of us know small groups are primarily a relationship building ministry tool. We do that. We do small groups to connect our churches together. That's the goal. We use small groups to bring people together, to build relationships, to create a stronger culture of our church. That's why we do small groups for the most part. Small groups in most places, in most churches that I've talked to and looked at their small groups models, most of them are not strong discipleship arms. Most of them are not strong biblical teaching entities. partially because small groups are led by lay leaders who don't have a strong biblical foundation to necessarily teach from. And over the years, most of us in ministry, we know that, you can get some random person leading a random small group teaching some crazy theology that, nobody's ever heard of and that we're not familiar with and certainly isn't biblical. And so what most of us do is with our small group leaders, we allow them to, use a book to teach from if they're going to do some sort of teaching or theology or whatever. Or we encourage them to go more interest-based, whether it's, walking through, some sort of interest. Maybe their small group is a kayaking group. I lead a basketball small groups. Maybe you're talking about pastor's Sunday sermon and you're just kind of going deeper with that. But there's no strong biblical teaching entity within most churches. And so what we have relegated that to really is Sunday mornings. But the other element that's come into play is we've tried over the last 20 or 30 years, we've tried to make our Sunday morning services a lot more palatable to non-Christians, people who are deciding to come into service. They're walking in the sanctuary and they're saying, hey, I want to check this church out and maybe make it my church home. Well, that's not really a great place to go deep into theology, deep into biblical understanding. And so what has happened is we have removed, in most of our churches, we've removed anything that that is focused on building a strong biblical foundation. Now, again, I think removing Sunday school was the right move. I think that's what we should have done. But I think we missed it a little bit on not putting in something else to continue building a strong biblical foundation. And what's happened is, over the last 20 or so years, is we have raised up two generations, really, one for sure, and most of the second generation of Christians who lack a strong biblical foundation. They don't know a lot of stories in Scripture. They don't understand a lot of concepts in Scripture. And unfortunately, those generations, and when I'm talking about generations, I'm talking about Gen X, which is mine. Some of us had Sunday school and some of us didn't. And certainly the millennial generation, most of them did not go through any sort of Sunday school class. And so we are now coming into a point where your church board, your staff, your volunteers, you have people in leadership positions in your church that are a part of the Gen X millennial generation who may or may not have a strong biblical foundation. And yet they're making decisions that are impactful to the forward motion of your church. Now, do I think you need to remove them? No, I don't. But I think the answer is we need to figure out and we need to find a way to infuse a stronger biblical foundation into our churches. For you as a pastor and ministry leader, if you're looking at your congregation and they're lovely people, you love them, they're wonderful, they're doing a great job in whatever they're doing, they're volunteering, they're faithful, all those things. But can you say that they have a strong biblical foundation? That if you said, hey, I want you to teach on this concept, or I want you to teach this story, that they could do it like that without going and studying and researching and all that? Would they be able to do that? And if not, if the answer is no, then I think that it's time to sit back and ask yourself, how am I going to create a stronger biblical foundation for my congregation? When we look at the Great Commission at the end of Matthew 28, this is Jesus saying, go and make disciples. And I think that's what we need to do. More than anything else, more than anything we do in the church, more even than evangelism. And I know that may be controversial for some people, but I think that if we do what Jesus said and go and make disciples, if we give them a strong biblical foundation, teach them how to live their lives according to Jesus, I think evangelism will take care of itself. And so what I want to do today is I'm going to give you 4 keys, 4 things that you can do, particularly looking at Sunday morning. So I'm not even saying you need to add something into what you're already doing. I'm saying take your Sunday morning, and here are 4 things you can do to start building a stronger biblical foundation. Do you need to create some sort of discipleship arm? Yes. Do you need to create, something that's more systematic and deeper into biblical studies? Yes, I think that's all true. But let's start with what we already are doing. Let's start with our Sunday morning sermon. Here are 4 things that we need to do to our Sunday mornings that will increase and strengthen that biblical foundation within our congregation. The first one is start using expository preaching. Now, you may already do this. You may already be opening up scripture and you are preaching a passage or a text from scripture. You're taking a chunk of scripture and you are preaching it, you're dividing out, you're studying, you're giving the history and the background, you're giving the cultural context. You are taking those elements and you are dividing that out in your sermons. If you're already doing that, wonderful. You're already preaching from an expository mindset. But if you look over the course of your year so far, so here we are in September. If you're looking over the course of your year from January to September, and I don't know how many sermons, we've preached at this point, but I would say, we're probably at the 30-ish mark of weeks. And so if you've preached, half of those have been topical sermons or more. So half or more have been topical sermons, which means you're taking an idea or a concept or an element and you are preaching that. Then what that means is you're taking a topic and you're taking passages from all over scripture and you're bringing it in to preach that topic. If that's what the majority of your sermons have been, then you're not teaching a strong biblical sermon, you're teaching a topical sermon. Now, I think topical sermons can be wonderful. They can be great. Expository sermons can be a little bit more challenging. But if you're just doing topics, then what happens is we take pieces of scripture from all over the Bible and we teach that topic. But that doesn't allow us to go deeper into, let's say we're looking at, the end of Mark. We're looking at Jesus's final days in Mark. Well, if we're preaching just that grouping of passages, let's say we're taking a passage, let's say we're taking 5 or 6 verses and we're preaching just those, and that's all we're covering on a Sunday morning. Well, what that does is it forces us to go deeper into the culture. It teaches us to go deeper into the overall biblical narrative that this set of passages fits into. It forces us to go deeper and really preach an expository sermon that divides it out. And then from there, we teach the lessons that we learned from that passage. We teach the lessons that the original authors meant for the original readers at that original time. And what that allows us to do then is to go deeper into understanding scripture as a whole. Now, if we're doing topical, that's fine. But if you're giving your congregation a strong diet of topicals, then what that means is you're not really going deeper into scripture the way an expository sermon would. And so the first thing that I think we need to do is we need to get back to preaching more expository sermons, more books of the Bible. We're going through, I know at our church, we have been going through the book of Mark for over a year, I believe. And it's been great. Every Sunday, we are covering just a small portion of scripture, and we're going deep and we're dividing it out, and we're getting a greater, deeper understanding of what scripture is saying and what the original author is meaning and the implications it has, not only for the Christians in the first century watching this all happen, but what it meant for us, what it means for us today, and how it impacts our lives and our relationship with Jesus. And so get into developing expository sermons and preaching those more often, because what that does is it takes your congregation deep into scripture and helps them have a greater understanding of what it means. So that's the first thing, expository preaching. The second thing is have engaging sermons. I know for me, this is a challenge because I am a teacher at heart, but at the same time, I'm very logical, ABC. So, I make a point and I make a second point and then I give you a conclusion. Well, that may be great for like a university professor, but at the end of the day, it's not very engaging. It's not fun to listen to. And so I have to think through, okay, how am I going to make this sermon engaging? How am I going to put stories in that are interesting, that are drawing the congregation in? Are there illustrations that I need to use? Are there visuals that I need to use? Maybe it's throwing a picture up on the screen, or maybe it's having something in my hands that people can see and do. I remember one sermon that I did. It wasn't a great illustration, but we were talking about sin and talking about, just kind of what, how sin can take a hold of our lives. And then I said in the middle of my sermon, I've really been struggling with something lately. And I kind of proceeded to talk about how much I've been struggling and the difficulty. And I know that I shouldn't be doing, it's not good for me. And that I, should probably, turn away and find a way to change this in my life. And by the time I got to the punch of the illustration, the congregation was on their edge of their seats, just waiting to hear this confession of what they presumed was some deep, dark sin that I was about to share. And what I shared is I have this really strong, very unhealthy habit of drinking Mountain Dew all the time. And I pulled out a Mountain Dew can and I put it on the table. And you felt this huge sigh of relief in the congregation. They all, had these nervous chuckles and laughs throughout the congregation, but it was engaging, and it was, and I don't have lots of those, but that one worked really well for that congregation in the moment. And so what can you do for this coming Sunday? What can you do to make that sermon engaging? If you are from a Pentecostal background like I am, the tendency is just to raise your voice and yell louder and be more dramatic in what you're saying. And to a certain extent that works, but that there's also a point where that just becomes louder noise and not really engaging. What are you doing to make your sermons engaging? What stories are you using? What illustrations? What things are you doing visually, even, auditory? I've used soundtracks in the background. I've used sound effects in the background to just create this greater sense of an engaging sermon where people are drawing in and a part of it. So that's the second thing. Create a stronger biblical foundation by making your sermons more engaging, because what that does is it draws people into the sermon and they're not on their phones. They're not, looking through their purses. They're not daydreaming about, the football game that's coming up in, the next hour. That's not their focus, because they're engaged in your sermon, which means they're learning more about the Bible as you're preaching. The third thing is give a practical application. Again, this is something that's not easy for me. I am so focused on preaching scripture that I don't always give the application. But what are you giving your congregation when the sermon's over and you say, have a wonderful day? What are they walking out of the doors thinking, I need to do that? I need to implement it in my life. I need to put that as a part of my day. What application are you giving them? Think of something. And maybe it's something simple. Maybe it's something as simple as, as you're going through your week, I want you every day to make sure you're encouraging one person throughout your day, whether it's at work or at school or in your neighborhood. You are going out of your way every day this week and you're being an encouraging person. Or maybe you're saying, I want to make sure that every day throughout the course of this week, in light of what we just talked about in the sermon, I want you to make it a point to read one proverb a day throughout the course of this week. Whatever the application is, but give them something practical, something they can walk away and do. Because what that does is it takes what you taught and it makes it tangible for them. So then it's not just this story from the Bible that happened thousands of years ago. It's applicable to me today, and it's making a difference in my life. If you do that, then people's engagement into your expository sermon will become a change in their lifestyle, and they'll start to see real change in their lives, and they'll start to understand how the passages that you preach in your expository sermon apply to their lives today. And when people do that, when people see the Bible is applicable today to their lives, it draws them into Scripture even more, and they start reading it more often when they're at home, in their free time, having stronger devotions. So that's the third thing, practical application. The fourth thing is provide systematic devotions. Now, this is going to be a little bit more work on your part and your team, your staff. But provide systematic devotions. So let's say you're doing you're preaching through the book of Mark, and you are wanting to take them through this journey through the book of Mark. And let's say that it's going to take you 3 months to do that. Create devotions that they can use throughout the course of that journey. Now, you don't have to have every day. I'm not saying if you don't have time for that, it's fine. But maybe you have one devotion each week. So you preach on Sunday And then maybe you encourage them, okay, on Wednesday, I want you to do this devotion. And maybe it's something you create, a booklet you create and you give out, or maybe it's something you email them on Wednesday. Wednesday, everybody in your congregation gets this email. It says, hey, here's our devotion for this week, having to do with what we talked about on Sunday. And you just kind of break down a devotion experience. Because again, that's going to take them from, here's what Pastor preached on Sunday from the Bible that happened thousands of years ago, to this is how that event that he preached about thousands of years ago applies to my life today and how it's going to impact my life throughout this week. Create devotions that take them deeper into Scripture. Because I guarantee you, every sermon that you preach, every sermon, regardless of style, there are things that you throw on the cutting room floor that you don't use in your sermon. There are ideas, illustrations, concepts. There are other passages, cross-reference passages that maybe you can't work into your 30-minute, 1-hour sermon. Take those, pick them up off the floor, and create a devotional experience for your congregation to go through. It's not more work. It's just taking what you've already done, the study that you already done, the research you've already done, and you take your sermon and you take that extra little bit and you just craft a quick little devotional email. And it allows them to then go deeper in their Scripture and builds that stronger biblical foundation so that they can go deeper in Scripture, understand how it applies to them, and quite honestly, fall in love with learning the Bible. That's what we want. We want them to love reading Scripture because it tells them more about their own lives as well as about their relationship with Jesus. And so that's the fourth thing. So creating a biblical foundation, 4 things you can do. Expository preaching, preach more expository sermons. Engaging sermons, preach sermons that are engaging. Put elements in there that draw people in and keep their attention for however long it is you're preaching. And maybe you just need to shorten your sermons down a little bit. Make it more engaging by make it shorter and more intense, more stuff in a shorter amount of time. The third thing is give them a practical application. Show them how what you just preached applies to them today and how it can change their lives, not just it's an event that happened thousands of years ago. And then finally, create systematic devotions. Devotions that take them step by step through whatever passages you're going through that build on each other and that apply what you're preaching on Sunday to their lives throughout the week. Systematic devotions. Those 4 things, you implement those, you provide those with your congregation, you start doing those 4 things, and you will start building a stronger biblical foundation within your congregation. And then you can start looking at what kind of systematic discipleship processes and steps and things you need to take to create a stronger biblical foundation for your congregation. When you do that, you're going to see incredible changes in your volunteers, in your congregation, in the impact that your church is making in your community. When you have a strong biblical foundation, everybody remembers what we're doing and the mission that we have, and not so worried about all the other peripheral things that churches and congregants, and even as staff and pastors and ministry leaders, we can get distracted with. And so do that, create a stronger biblical foundation, and open up those doors for your congregation to go deeper into Scripture. And that's what we want. That's really what we're after, is creating disciples, building disciples, bringing them closer into the relationship with Jesus. And so I hope that that's helpful. I hope that you can take those 4 things, you can implement them and make them happen. Because when your church has a stronger biblical foundation, you get better volunteers, you get better leaders, better deacons, better board members, better staff members. That's what you're wanting. And that just falls right in line with what we talk about here at Ministry Hackers all the time. We talk about living this dream life in ministry. And part of that is having a strong team that can help you alleviate some of the pressures of ministry, that can help you, do more things with less time. And part of that is when they have a stronger biblical foundation, it makes that possible. And if you're interested in how that would look or how that's supposed to work, I want to encourage you to go to brandonpartycooper.com/more-time-more-money. And what that's going to do is it's going to show you step by step how you, right now, starting today, how you can start building this lifestyle where you get to have this growing ministry, have this growing congregation, this growing church, and at the same time, enjoy your time with your family and time with your friends. You get to focus on living a lifestyle that's healthy, whether it's physical health, mental health, spiritual health, whatever it is, wherever you are, This is going to create margin for you, give you more time, as well as create margin in your finances, more money, allow you to live the lifestyle that you want to live. That's a healthy lifestyle, while at the same time pastoring a growing church and a growing ministry. So again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time and more money. I'm sorry, more time, more money. Put that in. It'll take you to the landing page. You'll get your free guide. Step by step, it's going to walk you through the whole thing. And you can start living your dream life and ministry starting today. You can start moving towards it. All right. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful. We're going to follow up in the coming weeks and talk about how you can take it even deeper and creating a stronger biblical foundation with your congregation. All right. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next episode.